The story is told of a newly hired rabbi who was preparing for his first Shabbos in his new shul, and a couple of days before, the president of the shul called him up and asked what he was planning on speaking about at his drasha that week, his very first drasha. So the rabbi said, I thought maybe I would speak about Shabbos, about the importance and significance of observing Shabbos and celebrating Shabbos and how and why we do it. And the president said, well, you know what, to tell you the truth, to be honest, I'm not sure that's a great idea. We have a wide variety of congregants here. Some keep Shabbos, some don't keep Shabbos. People do it in different ways. It's a little bit of a touchy subject. I don't want you to get people upset on your very first week. Maybe choose something else. So the rabbi said, okay, he thought for a moment, maybe I'll speak about kashrus and keeping kosher. And the president said, of course, well, some people do keep kosher, some people don't keep kosher, dairy and fleishig and in the house and out of the house. It's a little bit sensitive and it's led to some quarreling in the past. Maybe choose a different topic. So the rabbi thought for a minute and said, maybe I'll speak about coming to shul. We'll all be there in shul anyway. The importance of coming to minyan and davening every day. And the rabbi said, of course, well, you know, people are very busy during the week. And we've talked about it before, but people feel guilty and people get upset. It's really not the best topic to choose, especially your first week here. So finally, the rabbi turned to the president and said, you know what? Maybe you have a suggestion. Maybe you can tell me what you think I should talk about for my first drasha here in shul. And the president thought for a moment and said, I would suggest maybe talking about Judaism. There's different varieties of that story or joke. I'm not sure if it ever actually happened in that exact way, but I think there is a deep lesson that holds some truth in this story. The Gemara in Masechah Sanhedrin on Daf Chaf Amud Beis, page 20b, says that when Bnai Yisrael would enter the land of Israel, there were 3 mitzvos that needed to be done as a nation, as a community, as a people. There were 3 obligations that we would have. 1 would be Bnai Melech, appointing a king over us. Number 2 would be the destruction of the people of Amalek. And number 3 would be, of course, Binyan Beis HaMikdash, building the Holy Temple. Now, those are 3 pretty important things. This is a big deal. 3 things that we as a nation would need to do when entering the land of Israel. I want to focus on the first of that list today, because it's the one that was mentioned in yesterday's Parsha, Parshas Shoftim. Som tasim alecha melech, the Torah says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, when you enter into the land of Israel and you ask for a king, this is how it should be done. This is the power of a king. This is how we should be appointed. Som tasim alecha melech, you shall place a king over you. So one would think that when the time finally comes and Bnai Yisrael say, okay, we're ready, let's appoint a king, let's fulfill what seems to be encouraged, if not obligated, in Parshas Shoftim, it would be a welcome idea and things would go smoothly, but not at all that way. If we turn to Sefer Shmuel Aleph, Perek Ches, Bnai Yisrael approach Shmuel, the great prophet at the time, it was towards the end of his life, and they suggest, Sima lanu melech l'shoftenu ch'kol ha'im, can we now appoint a king? And Shmuel, right away, the very next words say, Vayera hadavar be'enei Shmuel. This was a very bad idea in the eyes of Shmuel. He right away somehow knew that this was not being done the right way, and this was not going to go well. Fast forward a couple of prakim to Shmuel, Aleph, Perek Yud, and Shmuel is giving Musar, rebuking Bnai Yisrael, and he says, V'atem hayom me'astemes elokeichem. You have repulsed or disgusted even Hashem, your God, Asher hu moshia lachem mikol ra'oseichem v'tzarosechem. He has saved you and taken care of you through all of your troubles and through all of your struggles. V'atomru lo, and then you come and say to him, Ki melech tasim aleinu, that we want to appoint a king over us? What kind of chutzpah Shmuel seems to be saying? After all Hashem has done for you, you're going to ask for a king? And when you read these psukim, one wonders, what do you mean? Som tasim alecha melech. Isn't this something that we talked about years ago? That would be a good idea? That would be encouraged? Maybe even a mitzvah? What did they do wrong? And many of the Mepharshim ask this question and offer different answers. How can we reconcile the fact that on one hand in Parshas Shoftim we read about the mitzvah of Som tasim alecha melech, and it seems like a great thing. And then when it actually comes to fruition, when it actually happens a few centuries later in Sefer Shmuel, it seems to be a disaster right from the very beginning. From their very request, Shmuel says this is a bad idea. How could that be? How is that fair? How does that make sense? The Ramban, and I'm just mentioning this tangentially, as I mentioned, there's a number of answers. The Ramban focuses on the fact that when Bnai Yisrael ask for a king, they ask for a king, the words that they said, and I read them before, Kechol hagoyim, sima lanu melech l'shoftenu kechol hagoyim, place a king, give us a king like the other nations around us. And the Ramban is discussing this age-old problem of Jewish people looking to other nations and trying to imitate them and wanting to be like them. We want a king because they have a king and it looks nice for them, so we want one too. And we know that where that road leads when Jewish people are trying to imitate and trying to copy what the other nations do, it's not a good idea, and that's why Shmuel right away said, ooh, this isn't going to go well. I see where this is coming from, and it's not from the right place. This Ramban needs a little bit more analysis and discussion, but I'll put that aside for another time. What I want to share with you today is a new answer, at least it was new for me this year, and it's suggested by Rav Mordechai Druk in his Sefer Drash Mordechai, and I think it is a beautiful answer, and it rang as true to me. One of the parts that I love about it is that it is based on, this whole theory, this whole explanation, is based on 2 letters. In fact, 2 missing letters. It's something that you wouldn't notice through just a very quick or superficial read through the psukim, something that I didn't notice until I saw it in Rav Druk's Sefer. But once you do see it, and once you look more closely, it is incredibly profound. A little bit of introduction though. What is the point of a Jewish king? You know, when the Parsha tells us, Som tasim alecha melech, what does that mean? What is the purpose for what? So the Gemara in Ksubos on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph Darshins has the following exposition. It says, Som tasim alecha melech, you shall place a king over you, shetehei emaso alecha, that his fear or awe or reverence should be upon you. When you appoint a king, the purpose of or the goal is that the king's awe should be upon you. Now, firstly, it's a little bit of a funny kind of drasha, because where does it come from? I mean, when you have a drasha, in other words, when Chazal say that there's a pasuk that says this, and it means this, well, that meaning has to come from something in the pasuk. There has to be something that intimates that, something that implies that or hints to it. So, Som tasim alecha melech, you should place a king over you. Where does that hint to, or what is the connection between that and ema and fear and reverence? So what the Gemara seems to be darshaning is, Som tasim alecha melech, you should place a king, not just place a king, but alecha. The key word in this drasha seems to be you should place a king over you, above you, on top of you. Someone who's looking down, someone who we look up to, someone who's watching us. It's like, remember as a student when the teacher left the classroom for a moment and it was a moment of pandemonium and chaos and freedom and you could do whatever you wanted. Students act differently when the teacher's in the room watching them because there's a certain amount of ema, hopefully, a certain amount of fear or reverence when the teacher is there. Maybe if you work in a business, when your boss is there or your supervisor's there, you act differently, you speak differently, think differently, you work differently. When you're driving on the road and there's a cop nearby, you drive more, you pay more attention, you drive more slowly, you drive more safely. Hopefully we always drive safely. But when there's somebody who has a position of above you, a position of authority, alecha, then there's a certain ema, or reverence, or an awe that almost automatically exists. So when the Torah says, Som tasim alecha melech, the Gemara seems to be saying that word alecha, place a king above you, implies shetehei emaso alecha, it repeats that word, that his fear or his reverence should be above you. That's the whole purpose of a king, is that we want someone who's there looking above us, like a teacher, like a boss, like a policeman, someone who's there to make sure that we're making our best decisions, that we're acting as a just society, that we're following halacha, that we're treating our neighbors properly, that we're following the mitzvos, someone who can give us musar, rebuke when it's needed, someone who represents Hashem as a king, so that when we look up, we'll be reminded that there's someone above us who's looking down and watching all of our actions. And it's not just the king, but it's a king who has a cabinet and messengers and officers and governors who are all sort of setting a certain tone and setting a certain ema, a certain yiras Hashem, a fear, a reverence, a significance to our actions that will remind us to behave properly. In fact, that's really the theme of this parsha, Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha. You should place judges and officers and enforcers. We want to make sure that we set up a society that is functioning properly and morally and fairly. Not only just that we don't damage each other and that I don't break your car, but also that I do the mitzvahs. We know a Jewish king had an incredible influence. I mean, the great kings removed avodah zarah from the homes of the Jewish people and brought Torah and mitzvahs and halacha to the forefront. And unfortunately, we had evil kings who brought avodah zarah into our homes and into our places of worship. The king represents a figurehead that's not just theoretical, but very practically affects the way the Jewish people behave in the direction that we take. That's the purpose of a Jewish king. Som tasim alecha melech, place a king above you, someone who you look up to, someone who will cause you to rethink your choices and your decisions to act properly. I think of we don't really have that many real kings nowadays. It's like, the King of England, or the Queen of England now, the royal family in England. I'm not sure nothing against them, but I'm not sure their purpose is to set a moral tone for the nation, or to deliver rebuke or musar and lead the people in the ways of certainly Torah mitzvahs. They're there for entertainment. They're there for the economy. They're there for prestige. It looks nice. It feels nice. They're there for fun, and there's nothing wrong with that for them. The problem is when Bnai Yisrael come to Shmuel, Shmuel sees right away that we didn't want a king for the right reasons. How did Shmuel know this so quickly? As I mentioned before, it's because of the two missing letters. Listen to what Bnai Yisrael come and say to Shmuel. Shmuel, ata, now, sima lanu melech l'shoftenu kechol hagayim. Place, and they should have said sima aleinu. The whole purpose of a king is that he's alecha, that he's above you, that he's on top of you. They don't say sima aleinu, place a king over us. They say sima lanu, give the king to us. We don't want someone above us who's looking down, who's going to cause us to reconsider, who's going to strike fear and awe in our minds. We want someone who belongs to us, who will say what we want him to say, who will do what we want him to do. He'll improve our economy. Maybe he'll strengthen our military. It'll be somebody who will he'll be there as a figurehead for entertainment, for power, but not someone who's going to cause us to have to confront difficult decisions or to make changes in our life. We want a king like the royal family of England. And right away Shmuel said, Vayera hadavar be'enei Shmuel. This isn't the reason that we have a Jewish king. Sima lanu melech. You want me to give a king to... It's like we want a king, but we don't want him to talk about Shabbos, Kashrus, or davening. We'll give him the list of topics that he can talk about, but nothing else that might make us a little bit uncomfortable. That's not a Jewish king. That's not the purpose of a king. Som tasim alecha melech. The purpose of a Jewish king is somebody above you who's going to challenge you, who's going to, even if need be, rebuke you and give you constructive criticism, who's going to help you develop and grow. The truth is, nowadays we don't have a king, but that's okay. I don't think this lesson applies only to kings. It could apply to a teacher, a book, an idea, a class. Sometimes we shy away and we run away from dealing with things that make us uncomfortable, that we struggle with, that we'd rather just pretend aren't there and not discuss or hear about. But the lesson of Som Tasim Alecha Melech is it's healthy to have things in your life, whether it's a person or an idea, but things that will challenge us to confront the struggles that we have and do our best to deal with them. It doesn't mean we're expected to be perfect, but it means we're expected to not run away. Shlomo HaMelech, one of our greatest kings, one of the great kings the Jewish people ever had, wrote in Sefer Mishlei, Al tochach leitz pen yisna'eka. Don't rebuke a mocker or a scorner, someone who doesn't take things seriously, because he'll resent you for it. Hochach lechacham v'ye'ehavecha. Give rebuke to a wise person, and he will love you. What is the sign of one who is truly wise, a chacham? Not how many degrees he has, not his IQ or how well read he might be. A chacham, Shlomo HaMelech says, and Shlomo HaMelech was chacham mikol adam, the wisest of all men, and he teaches us. You know what a quality of a chacham is? Hochach lechacham v'ye'ehaveka. You can rebuke or criticize a wise person, and he will love you for it. He is open and receptive to constructive criticism. He even seeks, desires, and loves it. A wise person isn't one who says, please don't talk to me about topics A, B, and C, because I don't like to hear about them or struggle with them or feel guilty. A chacham is one who says, let's discuss these issues. I may not be perfect, but I'm willing, able, and even seeking to challenge myself to rethink things, to grow, and to confront things that might be difficult for me. Som tasim alecha melech. Place a king, whether it's a literal king or in our case a figurative king, above you, who brings a little bit of ema into your life, a little bit of fear and reverence, and causes you to consider your decisions carefully. That is the sign of a true chacham, of the wise people that we all strive to be. Have a great week. Shavua Tov.